وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. في حين أن الرئيس ترامب التقى بالكثير من زعماء العالم ويتخذ بعض الإجراءات الجوهرية في الخارج، لم تتضح بعض المعالم النهائية لإجزاء مهمة من سياسته الخارجية عامة، وذلك يشمل مثلا مكافحة الإرهاب. قطع الرئيس على نفسه عهدا شهيرا بتدمير الدولة الإسلامية، ولكن ماذا ستفعل أمريكا للضمان ألا تبرز جماعات جهادية أخرى في أعقاب ذلك؟ استهدف الرئيس إيران باعتبارها أهم الدول الرائية للإرهاب في العالم، ولكن أي إجراءات جديدة ستتخذ الإدارة لتصدي الأنشطة إيران؟ اتخذ الرئيس موقفا واضحا وقويا ضد استخدام الرئيس السوري بشار الأسد للأسلحة الكيماوية، ولكن هل تملك الإدارة الجديدة سياسة عامة تواجه استخدامها للقوى العسكرية؟ ومع انتشار التهديدات الإرهابية حول العالم، هل ترجح احتمالات أن تبادر إدارة ترامب إلى الهجوم الاستهداف هؤلاء الأعداء، أم أنها ستدافع عن أمريكا من وراء جدار دفاعي كبير؟ للإجابة عن هذه الأسئلة يسرني أن أرحب باثنين من أكثر خبراء واشنطن حنكة بمسألة الإرهاب، وهما خوان زراتي وآكي بيرتز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Today we're going to focus on Trump administration foreign policy and especially its counterterrorism strategy. So gentlemen, welcome. Juan, let me begin with you. Big picture, we've passed 100 days. We have a general image of Trump administration activity around the world. Is there a Trump doctrine that you can discern?
I don't think so, and I think those that are trying to define a Trump doctrine are grappling with the ambiguity of a policy that hasn't really been formed strategically or ideologically. There's no coherence to it yet. That said, there have been several things that the Trump administration has done that has begun to shape a policy. Certainly in the counterterrorism realm, it's a more forceful, more confrontational strategy, a willingness to not only apply more force, but a willingness to be on the ground a bit more aggressively than we've seen in the past, and a willingness to demonstrate the use of force to send signals. You saw the use of the most powerful non-nuclear weapon against an ISIS encampment in Afghanistan, intentionally used to not only affect the enemy, to attack ISIS, but also to demonstrate that the U.S. was more willing to use force and willing to be more aggressive. That, I think, is playing out in other fields with respect to Iran, with respect to North Korea, with respect to pushing back where the Trump administration feels that the prior administration was not advocating American interest forcefully enough, certainly wasn't defending interests of our allies aggressively enough, and where there are real challenges like Iran and North Korea. This is an administration that seems willing to be more confrontational. And so at a minimum, you've seen a more forceful foreign policy, but one that still hasn't taken on definition in terms of strategy or ideology.
Okay, Aki, welcome to the show. Aki, can you discern a Trump doctrine?
Well, the funny thing you mentioned that is that the White House communications director recently said that there is no Trump doctrine in foreign policy. And so what we see is a lot of tactical efforts to change things a little bit on the ground, but there's no overall strategy. So for example, you see an airstrike in Syria, you see some efforts maybe in the Korean Peninsula and so forth. But remember, and this is an apocryphal statement by the historian Shunzi, or Shanzu in English, is that tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. You cannot have a series of tactics and actually sort of come up with a grand a grand ending to this wonderful story unless you actually know where you want to go.
So I know you quoted the White House official. It may be the same person who said unpredictability is part of the strategy. It's a key element of the strategy. Is that a reasonable approach to have for a president of the United States?
To a certain extent. I think it actually can work to shape and reshape dynamics diplomatically, geopolitically. You've seen this begin to work a bit with the relationship with China. I think the Chinese are a bit wary of what the Trump administration is willing to do, for example, in the trade context, and so much more willing to begin to show signs of more cooperation. But there are limits to that. There are limits in a couple of ways that are important. One is, at a certain point, you need strategic coherence and policy coherence. And to the extent that there is ambiguity or even contradictions within the strategy, that becomes a very difficult strategy to manage for the U.S. government. You want the Department of Defense, the State Department, all of the elements of American power aligned. And if there is ambiguity or confusion, it's very hard to align those forces moving forward. The other problem is, at a certain point, our allies, certainly the international system, relies to a certain extent on American power and consistency. And to the extent that there are fluctuations in how the president talks about issues, for example, the withdrawal from NAFTA, trade agreements, that has major repercussions on markets, on economies, and that kind of ambiguity actually brings potentially instability. And so there is some advantage to being unpredictable, and that can be useful in pieces and parts, but longer term it's a difficult way of producing a coherent strategy, and one that our friends and allies can actually adhere to.
The unpredictability, like Juan has said, is a potential good. But remember, what the United States brings across the globe is stability. We know that tomorrow will be the same as today as it was yesterday. And so we do want the 7th Fleet patrolling the waters in Asia. We do want to have a robust military efforts in Europe against various adversaries in Russia and elsewhere. We do want to know that these things are there, and when we start messing around with our core relationships, as we've seen with Australia, with the British GCHQ, their Signals Intelligence Organization, and we start messing with our groups, let's say with Mexico, criticizing Canada, our neighbor to the north, that creates instability when America should be the bedrock of stability.
Okay, so let's hone in on the counterterrorism story in this administration for just a minute. Aki, let me ask you this. The president has, of course, famously committed himself to destroying ISIS. How are we doing it, and how are we doing? Is this going to be by ourselves, with allies? Does he mean literally to obliterate the people? Does he mean to obliterate the idea? What's really behind this commitment?
That's a great question. One of the issues is that national security and intelligence gathering and intelligence work is a team sport. You can't just do things by yourself. And we all know that Daesh is an organization spread out over multiple countries. We need to work with those host organizations to actually take them out. Not only do you have to attack them using sort of conventional forces, but you also have to attack the idea. And we, the United States, can't actually attack an idea, which essentially is a Middle Eastern issue, to an extent without our colleagues and our allies in the Middle East and East Asia, South Asia as well. So to say that we're going to degrade and destroy, in fact, I don't think they're even saying degrade anymore. They just say destroy. Destroy an organization, an idea, and an infrastructure are all completely different things, and we need to actually use not only the tools that we have here at our disposal, but also the tools that our allies across the globe have as well.
Okay, Juan?
Well, language here matters. It matters in terms of shaping strategy, in terms of shaping legal parameters, and so they've purposely moved, the Trump administration has purposely moved to this lexicon of destruction and destroy to demonstrate a willingness to use more forceful means and certainly to be more aggressive in terms of dealing with ISIS. But Aki's exactly right. Not only is it difficult to think about what destruction means in terms of an ideological problem, a movement that is shifting on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria and can shift into an insurgency or a terrorist organization as it loses territory. But it's also difficult as this group has metastasized and as Al-Qaeda itself has metastasized. And so it's not just the problem of where they hold territory in Iraq and Syria, it's also their presence in West Africa, it's their growing presence in Yemen and South Asia. And so the question of the destruction of the group is a destruction of a network. And I think then you have to worry about what are the means by which you do that. You certainly have military means, you have intelligence, you have law enforcement, you have all sorts of capabilities and local partners that have to be a core part of that. There's also the question of what comes after, because I think American counterterrorism policy has always suffered from focusing on the current manifestation of the violent Islamic extremist threat as it's manifested, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. The challenge is what comes after. Even if we were able to destroy the caliphate as it sits in Iraq and Syria, what comes next in Mosul? What comes next in Raqqa? What comes after with the 40,000 foreign fighters that have been lured into the ISIS ideology, many of whom have returned to their home countries? And so this isn't just this isn't an easy endeavor to simply look at a map and figure out how you're going to constrain the territory. This is a metastasized movement with an ideology, with fighters, and so this is really generational. And I think it's a challenge for this administration to think, what does defeating this group really mean? And I think they're in the middle of trying to both articulate that and define it.
Right. So I actually wanted to just pursue this question for just a minute. I mean, it's one thing to have Liberation Day in Mosul and in Raqqa, but does this administration, which wants to stay out of the swamp of the Middle East, do you think they're going to slowly but surely find themselves invested deeply in Syria and Iraq to make sure that son of ISIS doesn't emerge in its wake?
The son of ISIS problem is one of those issues that we talk about, and I'm not sure, I haven't seen anything from the Trump administration that specifically says what happens after this terrible battle for Mosul ends and they lift the Iraqi flag over all of it. What will happen to the 1 million, 1.5 million people once they come back? Will they find no jobs, no economic capabilities, any infrastructure left over? And the major drivers that caused ISIS to emerge in Iraq and in Syria are still there. What is the Trump administration going to be doing that? And it's kind of hard to determine what they will be doing with it, given that they have officially said that they want to cut the State Department budget by 20-some%. They want to cut USAID budget. These are the follow-on efforts by the U.S. government to make sure after the shooting is done, make sure that everything is pacified, that people have jobs and security and so forth. And so I'm not sure what happens after the flag of victory is waved.
Rob, I think what you and Aki are just talking about hits on a fundamental question for the Trump administration and its policy. Certainly in counterterrorism, what comes next and what resources we apply. This is an administration that has said we're going to invest heavily in hard power, not in soft power. Well, the reality is post-conflict reconstruction, whether you call it nation building or something else, is about soft power, is about political fence mending. It's about development assistance. And it doesn't have to be simply the United States, of course, but it is a fundamental question. How much time and effort is this administration going to put into issues like reconstruction, issues like governance, which are, as we know, critical to the long-term stability of these regions where these terrorists have taken advantage of the lack of governance. This is also a question of long-term strategy. Does this administration actually want American long-term presence in the Middle East, in parts of the world where American presence has been an important, at least stabilizing force from our perspective, at a time when the administration has also said, look, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We don't want to nation build. We don't want to be present where we're not wanted, and certainly not in places like Syria. And so there is this dynamic tension in the policy that's going to play out precisely, given your question, in the counterterrorism lens. How present are we, and what's our long-term plan and strategy and capability to deal with the post-military aspects of the conflict?
Okay, we'll come back and discuss more about these issues with our guests in just a moment. panelists today include Juan Zarate. Juan is one of our nation's leading counterterrorism and national security experts. He is the chairman and co-founder of the Financial Integrity Network, the senior national security analyst for NBC News, and a visiting lecturer of law at Harvard Law School. He served as Deputy Assistant to the President, President George W. Bush, and Deputy National Security Advisor for Combating Terrorism. Previously, he was the first ever Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes. Sitting to his right is Aki Peretz. Aki is a former analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency and the co-author of Find, Fix, Finish: Inside the Counterterrorism Campaigns that Killed bin Laden and Devastated al-Qaeda. He recently worked at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs and the think tank Third Way, where he synthesized complex national security issues for members of Congress. Aki's insights have been featured in numerous media outlets, from Fox News to National Public Radio, from the New York Times to the Washington Post. All right, gentlemen, let's broaden the aperture a bit. We focused on fighting terrorism in the Iraq-Syria nexus. The administration is also working on a big second conflict, and that is the Korean Peninsula, where tensions are brewing. What lessons can we draw from how the administration seems to be approaching the Korean conflict and its impact on other conflicts around the world? Aki?
Words matter. And the president recently said that there is a real chance for a real war on the Korean Peninsula. And that's something that I was in a discussion recently with a person at one of the think tanks here at the Heritage Foundation, and we were talking about, he claimed that words and the tweets that President Trump does, like, it doesn't matter, you have to see what words and actions matter. But he specifically has said that there is a possibility for armed conflict. And so this is not just a little conflict. This is a country, North Korea is a country which has had twice as much chemical weapons than Syria ever did. It is a country that has a nuclear weapon, potentially several nuclear weapons. It's also located in a specific area that is between the second largest economy in the world, the third largest economy in the world, and South Korea, which is a dynamo unto themselves. If there is a conflict, hundreds of thousands of people will die, and the United States will be drawn into a war because we have these defense treaties with both South Korea and Japan. And so if there is any sort of belligerence, it will be an immense problem, to put it lightly.
Yeah. Do you see the administration feeding this problem or calming this problem? How is it addressing it?
Well, it's a little bit of a mix. I think there are three things at play here, Rob, that are important to keep in mind. One is the administration has declared the era of strategic patience over. The idea of sitting back and waiting to see if some diplomatic path will open to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, that hasn't worked. And that hasn't worked because the North Korean regime has continued at, frankly, a quickened pace of developing its missile technology and its capability to even send intercontinental ballistic missiles across the Pacific to hit the United States, and then its nuclear program. It's on the verge of yet another nuclear test, and it continues to improve its nuclear capabilities, not to mention its stockpile. So the administration is trying to deal with the reality that this is a threat that's reaching the point where it's an existential threat potentially for the United States. And that's something different than in the past, and they're trying to signal that with their words and with their actions. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is they're trying to change the diplomatic landscape here. For a long time, China has had a very different calculus with respect to North Korea. They've been willing to tolerate North Korea's belligerence. They've in some ways liked the fact that North Korea has been a bit of a thorn in the side of the Americans. For the U.S., the nuclear issue has been paramount. Hasn't been for the Chinese. The question now is, can the U.S. help reshape that principal interest for the Chinese? Can we reshape their calculus in terms of dealing with North Korea so that the Chinese begin to exert more political, economic, and diplomatic pressure on the regime in Pyongyang. So the tweets, the messaging, the meeting with the Chinese leadership all was an attempt and continues to be an attempt to reshape that Chinese calculus. And the last thing they want to do with the saber rattling is to demonstrate that there is American resolve. I think there's a sense that the prior administration was seen as too soft, not reliable, allowed red lines to be crossed without consequence. And so some of the saber rattling from the American side is a desire to demonstrate that the U.S. isn't to be trifled with, and it has to be taken seriously.
Okay, we're going to have to stop there, and we'll have you back to see whether or not, after another 100 days, the administration gets the big win. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Dakhel, Washington.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks.
فهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول سياسة الولايات المتحدة في المعركة ضد داعش، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.